This is my post-fight video on the fight between Richard Towers and Lucas Browne. It was the sort of co-main event of the Luke Campbell bill up at Hull last night, put on by Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. Two big heavyweights entering the ring, fighting it out for a chance at David Price's Commonwealth title. It was said throughout the broadcast that the winner of this would go on to fight Big David for the Commonwealth strap. Both guys seemed like decent enough blokes during the weigh-in. Obviously, like, they know each other. The commentators made several references to the fact that they're former friends and they're currently stablemates for Ricky Hatton. Now, Richard Towers came to the ring. 14 fights, 14 wins, won 11 by knockout. Lucas Browne came to the ring, 17 fights, 17 wins, 15 by knockout. So two big heavyweights, both undefeated, both with high knockout percentages. I was looking forward to this one, thought it was going to be a buzzing fight. The bookies had Lucas Browne about a 1-2 favourite, so yeah, there seemed to be the sensible money on Lucas, but a lot of the commentators were saying, you know, Richard Towers stood a pretty good chance. I must admit, I was on Lucas Browne for this one. I looked through their records before. If we look at Lucas Browne stopped Travis Walker in their recent fight. Not the worst form if you consider that Walker took Mike Perez, who I'm a fan of, the distance in, you know, sort of hard-fought fight. Lucas Browne, unanimous decision against James Toney. Obviously, no one's going to suggest James Toney is now what he once was, but nonetheless, fairly impressive. I mean, Browne is known as an absolutely massive puncher. That's his reputation, a guy who can come in and, to be honest, knock people out. One thing that did sort of occur to me is he knocked out Paul Butlin in the fourth round of their fight, whereas Anthony Joshua, obviously, as we know, dispatched him in the second. So I was thinking, you know, how big a puncher is he actually? But if I look at Richard Towers' record, I must say, pretty much a padded record. Very few recognisable names on the list. Gregory Toney, again, another guy looking at the Mike Perez line of form. Gregory Toney was pretty much destroyed by Perez in the prizefighter tournament. Obviously took Richard Towers in deep. The vast majority of people would say that Toney won that fight, except for some very charitable refereeing. So I thought the form on this, looking at it as a strict line through Mike Perez, obviously Lucas Browne did a better job on Travis Walker than Perez did, whereas Richard Towers effectively got beaten by Gregory Toney, who Perez destroyed. So I kind of looked at it through that form line. Richard Towers, obviously 6'8", you know, you'd think would try and keep the fight at range, whereas Lucas Browne got that sort of brawler mentality, would want to be getting into his face, landing bombs. And that was pretty much how the fight went, to be honest. You know, Towers, to be honest, looked a bit like a rabbit in the headlights. He was a bit scared, a bit nervy throughout the fight. He was trying to throw the jab, you know, to keep the jab at work and keep Lucas Browne out of range and frustrate the Aussie opponent. Lucas Browne kept coming forward, was obviously looking to engage, getting close, fight on the inside, that sort of style. Now, to be honest with you, first round, much of a muchness. I probably gave it just about to Richard Towers. From then onward, very much, you know, Lucas Browne. Every time Lucas connected with Towers, you know, Towers looked pretty fragile, looked like he could go at any moment. Towers did appear to be a bit chinny, you know, sometimes a bit too tall and ungainly for his own good. Lucas Browne wasn't necessarily, you know, proving that he was anything special, but he was just coming forward, putting the pressure on, landing heavy shots, and it seemed to be doing the job. And he wobbled Towers a lot. There were quite a few times you thought that, you know, Richard would go. You know, Browne won the fight, as you know, probably by fifth round knockout. Pretty much barrage of punches through to Towers. Towers not throwing anything back. Towers bending back over the ropes, eventually sort of went down, and he did get up. He was up and walking about. I think the referee was right to have stopped it. Like, Towers didn't know where he was at all, looked like an absolute junk man, and it wasn't too vigorous complaints from Towers. He's well and truly beaten. So Yeah, it was a bit disappointing from Towers, really. Like, you'd think for a man like him, coming to the ring, massive guy, huge knockout ratio himself, he didn't really bring it, to be honest. He looked nervous, he didn't throw many big shots, he was mainly just fighting with the jab, didn't ever try and get his big cross involved, which I thought was quite disappointing, I must say. Browne does what he says on the tin, he's a bit crude, bit like a battering ram, went forward and was trying to score the knockout, which he was successful with. So, yeah, I think Browne proved he was conclusively the best man on the night. Now, in terms of where we go from here, obviously both guys promoted by Ricky Hatton. Ricky Hatton's been on Twitter saying big things still to come for both guys. I must admit, I kind of have to disagree with him now on Richard Towers. Towers has been found out twice, effectively. I know he's had a lot of top quality sparring, there's a lot of references to his time with Klitschko, his time with Hay, etc. But Towers really was found out, and arguably this is the second fight in a row he's been found out after the fight with Tony before. But yeah, he was well and truly beaten. He looked very chinny. He looked like a rabbit in the headlights, and I think any time that Richard Towers steps up to serious level of competition, he's probably going to get stopped, because he's not he doesn't look like he can take a punch, to be honest with you. It certainly, if he'd come through this fight somehow and got in against David Price, for all of his frailties, you'd think would knock Towers out in the first round. First time he threw that right hand, you'd think that would be the end of it. Now, Lucas Browne is a slightly different proposition. He's a bit of a blunt instrument here. We're not looking at a classy fighter, great boxer, but he's tough, he comes forward, he throws big shots. He does have a reasonable level of power. Well, I'm not as excited about his power as as a lot of people are, but he seems to throw a decent shot, certainly. So where he goes next is anyone's guess. Whether or not the Price fight happens, I don't know. I mean, does David Price want to fight Lucas Browne? Browne is known as a big puncher. Is that a risk that Price wants to take? After obviously having problems with his his own defeats recently with Tony Thompson. Does he want someone who's a bit lighter punching? I don't know. Being honest, if the two do fight, I'd certainly have Price winning it. I'm not the biggest David Price fan. I don't think he's a world beater, but I think he's a class above Lucas Browne. Lucas Browne is a bit of a bit one route, one dimensional, etc. And if that fight were to happen, I'd definitely have Price. I'd want to be on Price's side for that one. In terms of where Lucas Browne could go, another video I've just done about the Mike Perez fight, that would be a decent fight. We're looking at two guys here who sort of between 15 sort of 25 in the BoxRec rankings, that sort of level. I'd have them both at. Perhaps they fight each other. They're two guys who possibly not many people are going to want to fight, so perhaps they should get it on in the quest to move up the rankings. I must say, Lucas Browne, I don't necessarily think he's going to go on to great things. He's a bit too crude, and certainly if he was in against the likes of a Fury or a Klitschko, or just a sort of a big man, I think he'd be a bit too crude, and he wouldn't be able to work his way inside as easily as he did with Richard Towers, certainly. So yeah, I was very disappointed with Towers all in all. That's my final analysis on this one. I think that's pretty much the end of Richard Towers as a sort of competitor, prospect, whatever you want to say. Lucas Browne fights on. Be interesting to see who he goes next. Interesting to see if he fights David Price. I know there was other people talking about Chisora throwing his name in the ring. I have both of the British fighters in both of those fights if they do go on. But no, it's a good win from Lucas Browne. He did what he had to do, but I'm afraid he did look a bit crude and one-dimensional, as I've said. Browne now moves to 18 fights, 18 wins, 16 knockouts. Towers, 15 fights, 14 wins, 11 knockouts. Please leave your comments in the section below.